Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. So today we will be discussing about the story Mahabharata, and for our UG syllabus from the chapter number 22 to 27 is being considered to our first semester syllabus. And here's the summary for the story, The First Honor. So let's get started. The First Honor. The story titled The First Honor is based to an incident from the Mahabharata, an ancient Indian epic. The tale revolves around the Rajasuya sacrifice, a grand ceremony performed by the Pandavas to assert their supremacy as kings. During the event, a debate arises regarding who should be honored first, the grandsire Bhisma and Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandavas, believe that Sri Krishna, the king of Dwarka, deserves the first honor. However, Shishupala, the king of Chedi, vehemently opposes this decision. He insults Krishna and questions the legitimacy and worthiness of the Pandavas, referring to their birth circumstances and lineage. Shishupala's word finds support among some of the assembled princes, and he accuses Yudhishthira of displaying favoritism and ignorance in honoring Krishna. The enraged Shishupala walks out, urging other kings to join him in protesting the perceived insult. Yudhishthira attempts to pacify the angry kings but fails. Shishupala arrogance escalates, leading to a fierce fight between Krishna and Shishupala, resulting in Shishupala's demise at the hands of Krishna divine disgust. Ultimately, the Rajasuya sacrifice proceeds as planned, and Yudhishthira is recognized as the emperor. The story highlights the complexities of royal gatherings, the clash of egos, and consequences of disrespectful behavior, ultimately showcasing Krishna's power and the establishment of Yudhishthir's authority. So we are done with the chapter number 22. Let's go ahead with the chapter number 23. Shakuni comes in. The story title Shakuni Comes In is a continuation to the events following the Rajasuya sacrifice. After this ceremony, Yudhishthir seeks the counsel of Vyas, who warns him of impending sorrow and destruction for the next 13 years. Yudhishthira shares this information with his brother, and they vow to avoid conflicts and maintain peace. Meanwhile, Duryodhan, driven by jealousy and resentment towards the prosperity of the Pandavas, confides in Shakuni, his cunning and manipulative advisor. Duryodhan expresses his sorrow over witnessing the wealth and alliances gained by Pandavas during the Rajasuya sacrifice. Shakuni assures Duryodhan that the Pandavas' success is merely a result of their rightful inheritance. He advises Duryodhan not to be envious and reminds him of the support he has from powerful allies. Shakuni proposes a plan to drive Yudhishthir out of Indraprasth without bloodshed. Shakuni reveals that Yudhishthir is fond of gambling and suggests inviting him to a game of dice. Shakuni, being skilled in the art of playing dice and unaware of its tricks, offers to play on Duryodhan's behalf. He assures Duryodhan that he can win Yudhishthir's kingdom and wealth through this game without resorting to violence. Duryodhan is intrigued by the idea and agrees to Shakuni's plan, setting the stage for the fateful gambling match that will have significant consequences for the Pandavas and the Kuru dynasty. The story highlights the vulnerability of Yudhishthir and the insidiousness of Shakuni, who uses Yudhishthir's weakness for gambling to further Duryodhan's malicious intentions. So, here we are done with the chapter number 23. Let's go ahead with the chapter number 24, the invitation. The story titled The Invitation revolves around Duryodhan's burning jealousy towards the prosperity of the Pandavas and his plan to invite Yudhishthir for a game of dice. Duryodhan, accompanied by Shakuni, expresses his sorrow and discontent to his father, Dhritarashtra, who tries to console him by highlighting his own accomplishment and the inheritance Duryodhan possesses. Duryodhan, however, remains unsatisfied and reveals his envy of Yudhishthir's success and the alliance formed during the Ratriya sacrifice. He resents the fact that the Pandavas have thrived while their own glory has diminished. Dhritarashtra advises Duryodhan against harboring hatred and jealousy towards his brother, but is met with disrespect and rejection. Shakuni seizes the opportunity to present his plan to Duryodhan. He proposes inviting Yudhishthir to play a game of dice and assures Duryodhan that he can defeat Yudhishthir and strip him of his wealth and kingdom without resorting to violence. Dhritarashtra, hesitant about the idea, suggests consulting Vidura for advice. However, Duryodhan dismisses the notion, believing that Vidura counsel will favor the Pandavas. Despite Dhritarashtra's concerns and reservations, Duryodhan persistently argues that engaging in the game of dice is a strategic move and an opportunity to assert their dominance over the Pandavas. Reluctantly, Dhritarashtra agrees to Duryodhan's plan, though he seeks a secret consultation with Vidura, who warns him that the game of dice will lead to ruin and unquenchable hate. Ultimately, Dhritarashtra gives in to Duryodhan's desire, and Vidura is sent to invite Yudhishthir for the fateful game. Dhritarashtra acknowledges that destiny is at play and reluctantly follows the path laid out by his son, despite his own reservation and awareness of the consequences. The story highlights the tension and the conflicts within the and Kuru dynasty, the weakness of Dhritarashtra's decisions, and the cunning manipulation of Duryodhan and Shakuni in their quest for power. So, we are done with the chapter number 25. Let's go ahead with the chapter number 25. We have completed the chapter number 24 and we are going ahead with the chapter number 25. The wager. In this story, the wager, Vidura arrives at Yudhishthir's palace and invites him and his brother to Hastinapur to witness the newly built hall, games, and play a game of dice. Yudhishthira expresses his concerns about gambling and seeks Vidura advice, who warns him about the evils of gambling but ultimately leaves the decision to Yudhishthir. Despite the warning, Yudhishthir decides to accept the invitation, driven by his addiction to gambling. The tradition is not refusing a game of dice, and his vow to avoid conflicts and give no occasion for anger. The Pandavas, accompanied by a retinue, travel to Hastinapur and settle in the designated palace. The next day, Yudhishthir enters the hall of games, where Shakuni invites him to play. Yudhishthir's Yudhishthir initially expresses his reservation about the game, citing its potential of deceit and the preference for consequences in battle as a path for Kshatriyas. However, his desire to play and his weakness for gambling prevail and he agrees to participate. As the game proceeds, Yudhishthir continuously loses. Shakuni dice seem to obey his will, and Yudhishthir wagers and losses loses various possessions, including jewels, gold, silver, chariots, horses, servants, elephants, armies, and even the ornaments and clothes of himself and his brothers. Despite the mounting losses, Yudhishthir remains reckless and driven by an unbroken chain of misfortune. He wagers and loses his brothers, starting with Nakul and Sahadev, followed by Arjun, and finally Bhim. The assembly trembles as Yudhishthir loses everything. Shakuni taunts Yudhishthir, suggesting that he values his stepbrothers less than his full brothers. Enraged by the accusation, Yudhishthir recklessly wagers and loses his beloved brothers one by one. Finally, Shakuni proposes wearing Draupadi, Yudhishthir's wife. Despairing and trembling, Yudhishthir pledges Draupadi unknowingly, sealing their fate. The assembly reacts with distress, agitation, and outrage. Duryodhan and his allies rejoice while Yuyutsu and Kaurava feels shame and sorrow. Shakuni declares victory and demands that Vidura bring Draupadi to serve as a slave in their household. Vidura, realizing the impending doom, reprimands Duryodhan and warns of the Kauravas' impending ruin. However, Duryodhan remains defiant and orders Vidura to bring Draupadi immediately. The story showcases Yudhishthir's weakness for gambling, the manipulative tactics of Shakuni, and the escalating tensions leading to Draupadi's humiliation. It sets the stage for the conflict between the Pandavas and Kauravas, which will ultimately culminate in the great Kurukshetra war. So, we are done with the chapter number 25. Let's go ahead with the chapter number 26. which is named as Draupadi's Grief. In this story, Draupadi's Grief, Parthikami, following Duryodhan's order, informs Draupadi that Yudhishthir has lost her in the game of dice and she now belongs to Duryodhan. Draupadi is shocked and questions why Yudhishthir would beggar his wife when he had other possessions. Parthikami explains that Yudhishthir had already lost everything else and had nothing else to offer. Draupadi, though devastated, gathers her strength and instructs Parthikami and asks Yudhishthir whether he lost himself first or her in the game. When Parthikami poses the question to Yudhishthir in the assembly, he remains silent. Duryodhan demands that Draupadi come to the assembly and ask the question herself, but she insists that Parthikami should convey her question and demand an answer. Duryodhan becomes angry and orders his brother Dushashan to forcibly bring Draupadi to the assembly. Dushashan goes to Draupadi and attempts to strip her of her clothes, but a divine miracle occurs. Each time Dushashan removes a garment, Draupadi is instantly clothed in fresh garments, and then pile of clothes grow before the assembly. Dushashan eventually gives up exhausted. The assembly is filled with awe and witness the power of divine intervention. Bhima, enraged, vows the Sikh vengeance on Dusashan, while Vikrana, a son of Dhritarashtra, speaks out in defense of Draupadi, stating that Yudhishthir had already lost his freedom and has no right to stake her. The assembly resonates with applause and acknowledges the legitimacy of the wager. Karna rises and counters Vikrana, arguing that Yudhishthir had already forfeited everything including Draupadi and that her clothes now belonged to Shakuni. The Pandavas, in the demonstration of honor and adherence to Dharma, cast off their upper garments in defense. Dhritarashtra, realizing the gravity of the situation, attempts to appease Draupadi and advises Yudhishthir to forgive Duryodhan and take back his possessions. The Pandavas, bewildered and relieved by the sudden turn of events, leave the hall. However, their respite is short-lived. In the heated discussion among the Kauravas, Duryodhan accuses Dhritarashtra of foiling their plans and insisted on resorting to decide to overcome the powerful Pandavas. He convinces his father that trickery is necessary, using the aphorism that any means justifies the destruction of formidable enemies. Duryodhan dispatches a messenger to invite Yudhishthir back to Hastinapur for another game of dice. Yudhishthir, feeling bound by honor, accepts the invitation despite the warnings of others. The stakes are set, and once again Yudhishthir faces defeat, leading to the Pandavas' exile to the forest for 12 years and 1 year incognito. The assembly hangs its head in shame as the Pandavas prepare to leave, fulfilling the term of the wager. So we are done with the chapter number 26. Now we will be proceeding the chapter number 27, which is the trust anxiety. In the story, the trust anxiety, the departure of the Pandavas into exile causes great sorrow and lamentation among the people. Dhritarashtra, concerned about the situation, asks Vidura to describe the scene. Vidura recounts how Yudhishthir walked with his face covered, Bhima walked with lowered eyes, Arjuna scattered sand on his path, and Nakul and Sahadev smeared their bodies with dust. Draupadi accompanied them, her hair dishevelled and tears streamed down her face. The blind kings become even more fearful and anxious. Narada the sage suddenly appears and foretells that the Kauravas will face extinction in 14 years due to the crime committed by Duryodhan. This news adds to Duryodhan's fear, and he seeks assurance from Drona, who promises to fight for the Kauravas but warns them of the Pandavas' divine birth and indomitable nature. Duryodhan Drona advises Duryodhan to make peace with Yudhishthir, but his counsel is not well received. Sanjaya, in conversation with Dhritarashtra, acknowledges the wrong committed against Draupadi and warns of the consequences. Dhritarashtra realizes the gravity of the situation and regrets not guiding his children toward virtue. Vidura repeatedly advises Dhritarashtra to restore the kingdom of the Pandavas and reconcile with Yudhishthir, but the king becomes irritated with the council and dismisses Vidura. Filled with remorse, Dhritarashtra sends a repeated message to Vidura asking him to return. Sanjay delivers the message, and Vidura, moved by Dhritarashtra's remorse, returns to Hastinapur. The two reconcile with tears of mutual affection. Later, the sage Maitreya visits Dhritarashtra's court and the king seeks his blessings. Dhritarashtra asks about the well-being of the Pandavas and if mutual affection can be restored in their family. Maitreya reveals that he encountered Yudhishthir in the Kameka forest and learned about the events in Hastinapur. He expresses surprise and that such things were allowed to happen under Bhishma and Dhritarashtra's watch. Maitreya advises Duryodhan to make peace with the Pandavas, considering their might and their connection to Krishna and Draupad. However, Duryodhan arrogantly denies the advice, causing Maitreya to curse him. Dhritarashtra, in remorse, falls to Maitreya's feet and begs for forgiveness. Maitreya states that the curse will only take effect if Duryodhan refuses to make peace. The story highlights Dhritarashtra's anxiety and remorse over the events unfolding as well as the advice given by wise individuals that could potentially alter the course of the conflict.